Alpha and Omega. Laodicea faces the Omega of deadly heresies. Once, twice, thrice. Isaiah 2, the law. Occasionally information arises from folk who are ahead of the curve when it comes to spiritual realities. And the link here is in that category. Leaving you, the reader, with some important things to consider. The research is good, yet at this juncture, what is not addressed are the wider implications of the 7 Noahides specific to Isaiah 2, Zechariah 8:23, Daniel 12, and Revelation 13, and also Matthew 24:15. So why the irony? Few, if any, in Laodicea even seem to realize from their own Bibles what constitutes end times, events, or are prepared to acknowledge what Scripture says is to come to pass, with the parable of the fig tree of Luke 21. Ask anyone in Laodicea what this fig tree parable is about, and at best you get a shrug, and they change the subject. With that in mind, time to consider the deeper irony, which is Isaiah chapter 2. And it shall come to pass in the last days. Isaiah tells you that what is to transpire from Jerusalem. The Bible describes city as the great city in Revelation. Isaiah told everyone who has ears to hear and eyes to see there will be a third temple and also the law, the 7 Noahides. Friends, welcome back. See this video. The new moral law, the law of one. Here's the thing. Because it is not the National Sunday Law, Laodicea will not believe Isaiah. So what are your chances of being heard in the meantime? You said nil? Yes, that's correct, nil. Pastors, elders of Laodicea, and yes, the pew sitters are amidst the euphoria of increased baptisms, church growth, and when asked, hey, are you familiar with the law of Isaiah 2 or the third temple? Or are you familiar with the fig tree parable in Luke 21? At best, a momentary glance or a pastoral elder defiance. Not possible for the third temple because of the 1858 statement. Sister White said, Old Jerusalem never would be built up. That's one thing, but worse is the instant dismissal of Bible evidence. And the reason why? Laodicea have a larger problem at hand in relation to Fundamental Beliefs 18, because Sister White's prophetic authority is about absent with Isaiah 2 and Revelation 17:16. But Laodiceans have their Bibles, surely? But guess what? Concerning Isaiah 2, there was a significant update in the writings in 1901 at Counsels to Writers and Editors, page 24, that changed completely about Old Jerusalem would never be built up, equals early writings 75, penned in 1858. Counsels, Writers, and Editors 24 was updated, and she gave good counsel, a message for frequent appearance. In the 21st chapter of Luke, Christ foretold what was to come upon Jerusalem, and with it he connected the scenes which were to take place in the history of this world just prior to the coming of the Son of Man in the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. Mark the words. CWE 24 completely changes everything a regular padre and elder states about the National Sunday Law and Old Jerusalem, which means it's time to consider the last days from the perspective of Luke 21. That chapter speaks of the times of the nations, finished, and then the fig tree parable. But more so, how the Alpha and the Omega of deadly heresies is woven into end events in the last days. and also how in the last days Isaiah 2 summarizes the parable of the fig tree. In the last days, Isaiah 2:2, and it shall come to pass in the last days that the mountain of the Lord's house shall be established, the top of the mountains, and shall be exalted above the hills, and all nations shall flow into it. And many people shall go and say, Come ye, and let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob. Equals third temple here.
Very soon we will all see the building of the third temple in Jerusalem.
And he will teach us of his ways, and we will walk in his paths. For out of Zion shall go forth the law, the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. And he shall judge among the nations, and shall rebuke many people, and they shall beat their swords into plowshares, and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war any more. For those who wish to consider the law of Isaiah 2:3 in its operational mode, see Revelation. That is, chapters 13 and 14, 6-9. Read on. As for those who at this stage fade out or fogged out and show little interest because pastor or elder so-and-so said this or that, it doesn't matter to them. They insist it's not the purpose of the Laodicea these days. Oh no. It's all about today and their outreach, winning souls with the heart-melting love of Jesus. And yet it's the same interfaith unity, but then it's true. What he who made said about the sleeping 10 virgins, when at midnight a cry was made, right? This background information with Isaiah 2 will help you to put a lot of the in the last days pieces together and not remain slumbering. Yes, and here's the thing. All the last day pieces, whether you believe or not, have everything to do with confronting the Alpha and the Omega of deadly heresies. Because this gets to the substance of this discussion of how many times Laodicea faces the Alpha and the Omega of deadly heresies. If you are not asleep, it's quite something. In fact, Isaiah 2 sets out the number of times Laodicea must be exposed to the Alpha and the Omega of deadly heresies. And as you will discover in part 2, coming up, it is not once or twice, with events of 1901 and 1980, equals how Laodicea had met the Alpha and the Omega of deadly heresies in the past. 1901, the Alpha and the Omega of deadly heresies. In 1901, Harvey Kellogg's The Living Temple was met by Sister White. 1980, leadership authorized Alpha and the Omega of deadly heresies and the 27 fundamental beliefs. Equals triune Trinitarian Godhead, one God, God the eternal Son of Roman Catholicism. Sister White warned the Omega of deadly heresies would be received and trembled. So who do you know in Laodicea can genuinely show you the issue of the Omega of deadly heresies was resolved? Spoiler alert. The 28 fundamentals have not been updated since 1980. So know the Omega of deadly heresies equals fundamentals number 2 and 4 remain the same. No change. Same serious problem. The Omega of deadly heresies, of which Sister White trembled. She confirms the commencement of the Alpha of deadly heresies was actually in the church, and she met the Alpha of deadly heresies and said it was spiritualism with the Kellogg's book Living Temple. But what about the Omega, which would be received? Laodicea faces the Alpha and the Omega of deadly heresies. Is it only once, twice, thrice, or more times? One must first recognize the Omega of deadly heresies comes in a series of events and has an exponential multiplier of spiritual carnage. And its deadliest is first directed at Laodicea, and 1 Peter 4 confirms the matter. Peter said in 1 Peter 4:17, for the time is come that judgment must begin at the house of God. And if it first begin at us, what shall the end be of them that obey not the gospel of God? Those of the house of God equals Laodicea. are they who obey not the gospel of God. And it must be noted, what Peter never said doesn't say the gospel of the kingdom. Paul has already told you what is the gospel of God and the truth of the Omega. Paul, a servant of Jesus Christ, called to be an apostle, separated into the gospel of God, which he had promised afore by his prophets in the Holy Scriptures. Gospel of God equals concerning his Son, Jesus Christ our Lord, which was made of the seed of David according to the flesh, and declared to be the Son of God with power, according to the Spirit of holiness, by the resurrection from the dead. The gospel of God is set out by Paul in Romans 1:1-4, and the gospel of God concerns sonship of Jesus Christ when in the flesh, and not in eternal days of eternity as God, eternal Son. Paul said the gospel of God is defined as being of the seed of David, and sonship is according to the flesh, not as God, the eternal Son, equals fundamental number 4, and that is terrible disobedience. Then Peter said judgment falls first on Laodicea with the gospel of God in respect to the Godhead. Think of it. When the gospel of God is superimposed over the alpha status of Christ's eternal identity, equals the word. This, if ye have eyes to see, equals is the omega of deadly heresies, and few get it. Therefore, for those of you who are steady with the knowledge of the scriptures, you may just now see why the series on the Alpha and Omega is beyond very important and serious because of the disobedience of accepting the central dogma of the little horn. Equals that fundamentals 2 and 4, Laodicea as fully Roman Catholic in disobedience, and Houston, we have a problem. But this becomes catastrophic at the time of the eighth king in Revelation 13. The Godhead of the incarnation of he who made. Maybe you will see immediately what is not said in 1 Peter 4:17. For the time is come that judgment must begin at the house of God, and if it first begin at us, what shall the end be of them that obey not the gospel of God? What is not said is the gospel of the kingdom. What is defined for judgment is disobedience to the gospel of God, the Godhead, and its bearing on the Alpha and the Omega of deadly heresies. So when you are bowing intellectually the Roman Catholic Church version of the doctrine of God, as is official in Fundamentals 2 and 4, then is anyone capable of explaining why is this not disobedience to the gospel of God from 1 Peter 4:17? So for Laodicea's disobedience to the gospel of God meant that the corporate probation is closed to the nations and churches, and the Roman Catholic doctrine of God as official doctrine in 1980 equals Fundamentals 2, 4, and 5 has sealed the spiritual deal. What 1 Peter 4:17 is confirming is corporate judgment for Laodicea has closed, whence the second agenda of ministration of the Day of Atonement closes at the holy place. And because Laodicea has lauded the Alpha and the Omega of deadly heresies, is the doctrine of God in doctrinal disobedience to Romans 1, 3, and 4, and John 1, 14, and 18, and found wanting warning in 1903. Read 8T 247 here. The point had to be repeated. And are you now getting at least some idea of the deadliness of the Alpha and Omega of deadly heresies when you read things from He Who Made's viewpoint? Hello, anyone home? Consider again what Laodicea has already faced and still faces, and includes a judgment warning that is past. 1901, the Alpha and Omega of deadly heresies. In 1901, Harvey Kellogg's The Loving Temple was met by Sister White. 1903, the balances of sanctuary, Laodicea will be judged. On her will be pronounced the sentence found wanting. By the light bestowed, the opportunities given, will she be judged? 8T 247. 1980, leadership authorized Alpha and Omega of deadly heresies in 27 fundamental beliefs. Triune Trinity Godhead, one God, God the Eternal Son of Roman Catholicism. Sister White warned the Omega of deadly heresies would be received, and she trembled. As you can see, Laodicea had faced twice the Alpha and the Omega of deadly heresies, and in 1903 was the warning found wanting, confirming 1 Peter 4:17. But today the Padre and Elder all say she has the truth on the Godhead and denies she must continue to face the Alpha and the Omega of deadly heresies. And what is terribly worse, Laodicea has not resolved what is the Omega of deadly heresies anyway. As Sister White said, the Omega of deadly heresies would be received, and she trembled. The Alpha and the Omega of deadly heresies is the perfect assumption. And it's deadly. Read again, Matthew 24:24. How deadly? Make the wrong decision at this stage, today, and the cost? What is lost? Answer. What is lost? The seal of God of Revelation 7, as defined by Sister White as the sealing time of the 144,000 of Revelation 14. 3T 266 267. Laodicea lost out on the pure mark of truth. So it gets back to he who made. He who is the true witness, and his counsel for Laodicea, which has always been to buy of him gold tried in the fire. And the first angel, yes, and that gold tried in the fire is eternal righteousness by faith. And that eternal righteousness, it's all about Christ's eternal identity, who was also God in the beginning. That eternal righteousness of his eternal deity equals Revelation 13:8, equals the Lamb slain from before the foundation of the world. And that identifies his eternal righteousness was as Father number 2, equals Isaiah 9:6 and John. And necessary basis of worship to first angel's warning. Laodicea, the antitypical of ancient Israel, is based on John 4:22 and Daniel 8:14. But how deadly is the Alpha and the Omega of deadly heresies? And what of it? How many scenarios of the Alpha and the Omega of deadly heresies does Laodicea face? That will be discussed in part 2. Maybe then you can see why part 1 is the foundation of the theological dilemma of the Alpha and the Omega, and the Shema of Deuteronomy 6:4 equals the law, equals 7 Noahide laws. See this link? Equals worship. Isaiah 2:3. And yes, then there's the precinct of the third temple, and the law goeth forth from Jerusalem. Then you must not forget, in its relation to the fig tree parable and the first angel's warning.